Hi friends, Paisley and Glue here. We're back with part 3 of our Sew With Me project, and today we'll be fitting our mock-up that we made last time for our little romper, and we will be truing up the pattern to get ready to cut into the fashion fabric. So let's get started. Okay, so got our mock-up on. It's looking real cute. One thing I will say for Vogue patterns, which I've not made a lot of, is they don't quite have the same ease issues that other commercials patterns have. So you'll often find in other commercial patterns that you'll have like way more ease than you need, which is sort of how much room you have to like breathe and sit and whatever. This is like almost a little too small. So I will say to be aware of that and know that you don't quite have the wiggle room that you do in other commercial patterns for making mistakes or like maybe not taking up-to-date measurements on yourself. I actually may add a little bit to the waist of this just because, I mean, I'm wearing a tank top underneath it right now, but it's like, do you see how this is sort of, the shorts are sort of like bubbling up here on the side? That tells me that the waistband is a little bit too small for me. So I may add just like a ½ an inch for ease. Other than that, the short part fits pretty well. It's again hard to tell in this muslin because it's like, it has a lot of sizing in it, so it's very springy. My fashion fabric is much softer, but I think if this is sort of collapsed, I think this is actually pretty cute. It feels pretty good in the rise. If you're gonna make shorts of something, the rise is sort of the inseam that goes around. Sometimes I have a problem with length in jumpsuits. I may add just a tiny bit. I can sort of feel it pulling if I sort of take a deep breath. You always wanna make sure to sit down in something like this and make sure that it doesn't become uncomfortable and get up all in your crotch. Nobody wants that. But other than that, the shorts look pretty good. And the top, I anticipated this because I often have this problem. I'm a size larger in my bottom than I am on my top. So I often have a problem with tops not fitting correctly. So to solve this, you can see how this is standing away from my body a lot here. And it's pretty roomy right in here too. Wouldn't always be an issue, except that I don't want to wear anything underneath this ultimately, so I'm going to want to fit this to my body better. So what we're going to do, sometimes it's easier to do on yourself than others. This one I can do myself. Sometimes I'll need a helper to fit me, especially if it's things in the back. Just going to pin out the sides a little. You don't want to overfit, but that sort of brings that a little closer to my body. So that helps us a little bit here, but we're still, this is still standing away just a little bit. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a little dart here, and then we're going to transfer that fullness later. And we'll talk about how to do that. Okay, so now that's fitting much closer to my body, and we're going to ultimately transfer this fullness. We're going to swing that down into the fullness that we have on the side seam, because there's really not too much there right now. The one other thing is that I want to bring up this line ever so slightly, again, because I ultimately want to not have to wear anything underneath this, and it's just a little into the side boob area more than I would like. And we're also going to know that I'm going to need to bring up this back line, because if we just took this in as I've pinned it out, obviously the front is now longer than the back. So we're going to bring up the back. I'm just going to notate that so I don't forget with an arrow. And then grabbing a ruler here, I think if I just add a ½ an inch, I'll be okay with that. So that'll start about there, and I'm going to bring that out about a half an inch, and we'll have that end just beyond the side seam there. But other than that, this is real cute. And it's going to have pockets. Very excited. Okay, let's get to work altering this pattern. Okay, let's true this pattern up. So truing is what we call it when we are making alterations to the pattern to make it fit our bodies better, more better. Let's start with what we know. So I think that I want to take a little bit out of this crotch length. So what I'm going to do here, knowing that I do have seam allowance on here still, I'm just going to shave a little tiny bit out of this crotch length. Normally I would do this in pencil, but so you can hopefully see it a little bit better on camera, I'm using a marker. Okay, so that's just making the rise of the pants a little bit lower so that when I sort of take that deep breath or when I sit down, I just have a little bit more length this way, so it's a little bit more comfortable. Okay, so feeling pretty comfortable about that. Go ahead and cut this away. So this is why it's great to transfer your tissue paper patterns to a paper or cardstock like this so that you can make these alterations and not have to cut up your commercial pattern to do that in case you want to use it again in the future. Okay, so the other thing I know is that I want to add a little bit to my waistband. Okay, so I have some scratch paper here. And I'm just going to simply tape some extra paper on there. Draw my new line. That marker does not write on there. And then do the same to the other side of the waistband. And this process is also why I don't like using commercial patterns that have seam allowance on them, because it just confuses me, but we're going to do it for this time. Sometimes I'll go ahead and when I transfer them, I'll actually like remove all the seam allowance, so that makes this process much easier for my brain to comprehend at least. But when you're adding to something, you need to remember to add it to all the pieces that are going to be affected by that. So that means that if I still want my side back pieces to meet at center back, which I do, I need to add a 1/4 inch to that little back section. Otherwise, you know, right now this is coming right to this 5/8 mark. Otherwise it will not meet up in the back, which is fine. But I do kind of like the way that looks. So I'm going to add a little bit to that. And then I need to add a little bit to my center back pant here. So it's going to be a 1/4 inch at the top. And then we can zero that line out to the rest of this inseam. You always want to make sure to square off your pattern pieces so that they match up later. So we just added the barest little triangle, but that's 1/4 of an inch, and then it's 1/4 inch on the other side. So it's really a 1/2 inch, which is a fair amount of ease on something that's supposed to be close fitting. So that will be much more comfortable for me in the future. So these 2 pieces are done. You end up with many little scraps of paper. And now we can think about, let's see, waistband's done, pocket. We can start thinking about these bodice pieces. So here's the first part I'm going to do is I'm going to take in the side seam. So what I do here is I trace where my safety pins are going in and then take the safety pins out. And I think that that's just easier to kind of see, especially if you didn't pin exactly evenly, it helps you sort of visualize how much you need to take in. So I was sort of even, but then you can measure, this is like 7/8 of an inch at the top, and then divide that by 2, and that's how much you're taking off the front and the back. So here's where I start to get annoyed that I have seam allowance on here, because it's just like, because this is all like the seam allowance is coming out and squaring off, it just like makes me super confused. But here we are. So 7/8 divided by 2 is just a little bit more than 3/8 of an inch. So that's how much I'm going to be taking off at the top. And it zeroes out to 1.5 inches above the waistband, except that's not actually the bottom of the pattern because there's seam allowance on it. So it's actually right there. So that's actually the 1.5 inches. So we're going to zero that out to that point. Inch and a half above that. And then if you have kind of a weird little corner there, you can always grab your hip curve and round that out a little bit. And we're going to take that off. So when we're doing this, because like what I was saying, this has seam allowance on it, and the seam allowance is all nice and pretty and squared off so that when we match things up later, everything is squared off and beautiful. That's not going to be the case anymore because I'm sort of adding and subtracting here. So when we go to put our pattern together, matching notches and circles is going to be even more important at that point. Okay. So now we are ready to transfer this dart. So here's where we kind of get into the fun parts of patterning. When you have I'm just going to transfer these markings onto where they would correspond to on my pattern here. When you have a rounded shape like a breast, you need to use darts, when you have a rounded shape like a breast or a shoulder or something like that, Usually you'll use seams, darts, gathers, something like that to form the fabric around that curve, because the fabric doesn't necessarily want to curve. So usually around a bust line, you'll have something of that. And in this case, we have a couple different, we have some ease going into the waistband, and we have a little bit of ease in the side seam. And then sort of the natural ease of going over and tying around the back of the neck. I need a little bit more help than that. So the fitting told me that I need to take in a little bit more fullness in order to cup the fabric to my body so that I feel comfortable. But I obviously don't want a dart there because that's not attractive. So what we're going to do is we're going to swing this dart over to my side seam. And now this was a mark that I transferred from the pattern, which is the apex of the bust. That's normally the most rounded, sort of the highest point of the bust line. And you can see that my own dart sort of generally falls into that same section. So what you're going to do is you're going to continue, draw a straight line through this dart so that it sort of hits somewhat of that apex line. And then you're going to draw another line through the middle of where you want your new dart to be, or your new amount of fullness. And we are going to just go ahead and cut this right out of the pattern. So I'm cutting that one line, and then I'm cutting along this line of my dart. So now, if we imagine that we're closing up this line, that's what I pinned out on my body, and you can see how it opened up this line. So that could be a dart that you take in the fabric, so there's a seam there. I'm just going to have it be fullness so that it sort of is more full on the side there and cinches in and gives that rounded shape. You could also do the same thing and draw a line here, and then this would open up and this whole thing would swing up, and then you could have either a dart or fullness here. Dart manipulation is one of those really cool things in pattern making where you can really put it anywhere you want to. There's sort of places that are more accepted to have darts than others, but sometimes if you need to hide a little sneaky dart somewhere, you can find places to put it. Okay, so here is my new pattern piece, but I also wanted to add a little bit of length or height, I guess, to the bodice. So generally I had marked kind of where I wanted that to start. It was about there. And it was going down into this side piece. I'm going to overlay, how am I going to do this? Maybe I'll just do these separately. Normally I would really butt these up because I don't usually have seam allowance on my patterns, and then you really know exactly where they line up and you can add an even amount and make sure that everything transfers really beautifully. Can't do that right now, but I can finagle it later when we go to put this garment together. So we're adding about a ½ inch, and then I'm going to use my curved ruler Let's do that. Okay, bring your side seam up to meet it. And then I wanted to add have that scoop down about 3 inches from the side seam on this back piece. So knowing again that I have 5/8 seam allowance here, 3 inches ends up about here. And then I'll bring up that side seam, and then I'll scoop this line down. To meet the rest of that back piece. All right, and then cut out all of your new pieces. Sometimes if there's a lot of alterations that I've made to a pattern, instead of having a million tiny pieces of paper taped to the pattern pieces, I'll just make a new pattern piece. Sometimes it's just easier. But there we are. So that's all trued up, ready to go. I think that's all I needed to do to this. So that means that we are ready to cut this out of fabric, which is super exciting. And we will go ahead and do that next time. So in the next section of this, we are going to take our trued pattern pieces and we're going to cut them out of our fashion fabric. And then we're going to go and get ready to start putting together. Okay, let's